asked a question before we started, and I suggested, are you there, Elliot? No, he's not there.
Yes, I'm here, Rabbi. I'm here.
Okay. You want to ask the question again?
Yes, okay. The question is on page 12 of the Siddur using it B'nai Yeshurin in the morning. That may be the one, Rabbi Lettofsky, you were involved in editing. But anyhow, on page 12, you have a list of rules for interpretation of Torah texts that supposedly are attributed to Rabbi Yishmael. I wonder who he was, when he lived, and to what degree do these rules bear a relationship to Aristotelian logic? I know there was some, of course, we live at a time when there were Greek influences and all of this back and forth influence of Jews and those in the surrounding culture. So I'm curious about those rules and their origin.
Okay, so I when he asked me that, I said, that's a really good question that I think everybody would be interested in hearing about it. So I asked him to hold it till our class. So let me answer the following way. I think probably the classic text now is that of my teacher, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who wrote a book in Hebrew while I was at the seminary, in fact, called Torah min hashamayim ba'aspaklaria shel hadorot. It's a 2-volume work. Gordon Tucker translated it into English. And in it, Professor Heschel analyzes rabbinic texts to show that there are 2 different schools of interpretation, one of Rabbi Yishmael and the other of Rabbi Akiva. Both of them were 2nd century greats, quoted all over the place. And they had contrasting understandings of the nature of Torah. Rabbi Yishmael's view was basically that God gave us the Torah, and Torah dibra bilshon b'nei adam, meaning that the language of the Torah is really human language and should be treated that way. Rabbi Akiva, on the other hand, had the view that the Torah is more divine. And therefore, you may know the legend, the Agadah, that Moses is watching God write the Torah, and on the many of the letters of the Torah, there are fancy additions to make it look very fancy. And Moses says to God, "What are you doing that for?" And God says, "There will come a great man. His name is Rabbi Akiva, and he will interpret all of those little things, that they will mean something." So Rabbi Akiva's view is the Torah is really a divine text, and you have to go beyond the interpretations of a human, because this text is not like a human text. The midot that is in the traditional Siddur in the morning, the 13 principles of interpretation, which you're quoting, it's not only in the Siddur Lev Shalem, it's in all of the traditional Siddurim. It's a kind of a piece of Torah that we study every morning. And following that study, there is a Kaddish de Rabbanan. That has become, in our day at least, a very crucial moment for mourners to recite another Kaddish in the morning service. Interestingly enough, a British scholar by the name of David Daube, Daube, has shown that the midot, the ways, the categories of interpretation, which Rabbi Ishmael is attributed, it's attributed to Rabbi Ishmael, that these are very, very similar to the way the Hellenistic scholars interpreted Homer and other ancient texts, so that, I see Elliot's on the phone, so that Elliot's question is quite to the point. That is, and I've emphasized this many times, here's another really big example of the influence of Hellenism on Judaism, that the various categories that are enumerated in this list, like Kal Vachomer, anybody who's studied a significant amount knows many of these, Klal, Ufrat, all of these various ways of applying a logic to the biblical text is really very much a Hellenistic borrowing into Judaism. Elliot, I hope that answers your question. Yes, Nelson?
Well,
Yes.
to me, it doesn't answer his question because he asked about Aristotle, and Aristotle is not the only Hellenistic philosopher.
Well, Aristotle really isn't Hellenistic. Aristotle is Hellenic.
Yeah.
When I'm talking about the Hellenistic, I'm talking about a much later time, the time of Alexander the Great, and later.
Alexander was one of Aristotle's students, nominally.
Supposedly.
Anyway.
There are a few hundred years between them, but that's okay. Aristotle studied with Jeremiah too, okay? Now, if you're going to take all of that crap together, fine. No.
So I was really trying to get at, there's
there's a distinction that I think is an important distinction. There's Aristotle and there are Aristotelian thinkers. But just like there's Plato and there are Platonic and Neoplatonic thinkers. Yes, okay? We're not talking about the original, we're talking about people who follow those kind of questions and answers.
But yes. Rabbi, I have another question following up to what you just said. Apparently, we're dealing with layer upon layer of understanding, going back to Hashem, whatever Hashem intended, and then these various human interpretations, impact of different cultures, the Hebrew language, the Greek language, etc. So obviously, there's many complications in terms of getting to the original intent of Hashem. How do we deal with that? Just accept that there are those levels and do the best we can. It's that recognition that maybe there has to be a sort of humility there, that we are human beings and can only go so far with it. So any comments, Rabbi, on how you deal with all of these multiple layers of interpretation?
I was just reading a great, I knew him as a fellow student. He sat in our Talmud class. His name was at the time David Weiss. He took on the Hebrew name, translating Weiss. David Weiss Halivni, who Zichrono Livracha, who just passed away, and there have been a number of beautiful tributes to him. He was a great, he came to this country having already Orthodox smicha, which I think he got at the age of 15, something crazy like that. Brilliant, absolutely a brilliant scholar who would sit in our Talmud class with Professor Lieberman, not because he had to learn the Talmud, but Professor Lieberman told him he has to sit in the class to learn how to teach. And so when I was a student, he would sit in the back of the class and just kind of observe. Later, very soon after he became a professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary, I never did study with him, but I have friends who did, and the tributes to him are really extraordinary. He was a brilliant man, and apparently, I didn't know him personally, but apparently a wonderful human being. And he was Orthodox, and in fact, he left the faculty of the seminary when the seminary decided to accept women as students for the rabbinate. And it was too much for him. And he left, continued teaching at Columbia, and then made Aliyah and taught at Israel. And he died at age 94. The headline said something about great, but sometimes controversial. He's quoted as saying, he wrote in his resignation letter, he wrote to the seminary faculty, I have a real problem. I can't talk with the people I daven with, but I can't daven with the people I talk with. But when it comes to the two, the more important thing is davening. And so I'm going to leave the seminary. In other words, he could talk to the scholars because his approach was a very innovative, using literary techniques to examine the Talmud and to see within it development and layers of development. I never really studied his material, but I know a tiny little bit about it. And this was very, very controversial among Orthodox people who said, oh my God, God gave us all of this. What are you seeing layers? What are you seeing development and so forth? Elliot, my view on this is, put aside the fact that God gave us all of this. This is a way of giving the rabbis authority. Once they have the authority, forget it. They have the authority, and your job is to listen to the scholars of your time who have interpreted this material to apply it to today. Forget about it being kind of a formal statement. The approach of someone like David Weiss Halivni Zal, and basically a conservative Jew, is that the revelation of God's will is ongoing. It's our job in our time to find God's meaning for our condition. How do we do that? We study the texts that have been handed down over the years in other conditions in very, very different worlds. And we try to mine those texts to learn from them how we should take these texts and apply them today. And if we do it well and honestly, with a tension, this is terribly important. There has to be a tension between modern values and that tradition.
Yes.
There's a tension because if we follow the tradition slavishly, then it's no longer relevant. And if we only look at modern values and forget about the tradition, then it's not Jewish anymore. So we have to do the two together, and that's what the conservative movement does. It takes the tradition and analyzes it and says, well, how can we learn from this to apply it to today? So take the issue of women. In the traditional world, women had a very clear role, and it wasn't learning Torah. And it wasn't becoming rabbis. But the world has changed. And women now are educated. And many of them, in my view, have far exceeded the men in terms of their knowledge and insight. And we have a heck of a lot to learn from them. Does God want us to limit Torah or to spread it? My view, God wants us to spread it, to deepen our knowledge. That means we need to learn from them, not to ignore them, not to insist women's place is in the home. You raise the children. It's up to us to study Torah. You have nothing to teach us. In fact, we're not even supposed to talk to you. That's what the text says.
Yeah.
I reject that text. It does not apply to our life today. On the contrary, it's a reverse today, in my view. We should be hearing and listening and studying because we have so much to learn. Because many of them are asking questions that have not been asked before and are coming up with fabulously challenging and insightful comments and approaches to our traditional texts. I have a cousin. We had a loss in our extended family, and I had to make with Gina Shiva call the other day, and at the Shiva call was a second cousin. This is on the Apple side, Steve.
Okay.
And my mother's side of the family, Steve is from my father's side of the family. It so happens that this cousin's daughter was a student at the University of Wisconsin when I was the Hillel rabbi, and I was privileged to do her marriage, her first marriage, they were divorced, of her daughter, and her granddaughter is now a rabbah, and not only a rabbah, she is Rosh Yeshiva of Hadar. And she writes a tremendously learned Dvar Torah every week, and I get it in my email. And I said to her grandmother that I've read several of them, not all of them, but I've read several of them, and they are mind-boggling in terms of the knowledge and the insight that she provides. Her name is Aviva Richman, and she is the Rosh Yeshiva of Hadar. And that's just one example.
Rabbi, what about Aviva Zornberg? It takes a
Oh,
lot of study to understand what she's saying, though.
not simple, but that's
Very
not new.
complex. Very
Not
complex.
new. Not new, but unbelievably. I mean, just yes, it's not easy to read and to understand, but she is. But that's not new. Aviva is relatively new, and they're increasing number, and it's fantastic. So, anyhow, Elliot, that's my take on it. We're building on a wonderful, rich tradition that has been handed down to us and has been throughout the ages added and added and added and added, meeting new environments and new problems and new developments. And we are living in a time of great change, and we have to use the insights from the past and apply them today.
Rabbi, the one thing that stands out from all of what you said to me is process. Process. We're involved with a process.
I call it conversation. It's the same thing. And that's my pet peeve, as you've heard me say it before, is that the vast majority of non-Orthodox Jews don't know the vocabulary, can't participate in the conversation. They don't even know the basics. And that's a tremendous, tremendous failure, I would argue. And that's why I'm teaching this, to give you some vocabulary so that you too can be part of this conversation, that you understand some of the issues that we have to deal with, taking this tradition and applying it to today.
You're
Steve,
fulfilling a very vital role. Continue to do it for many years.
thank you. Steve, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just something tangential. You mentioned, the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and the first time that I ever learned Mishnayot was when we came to visit you when I was a small child, and we stayed up all night on Leil Shavuot for Tikkun Leil Shavuot, and one of the professors gave a shiur, and we learned all of Masechet Yevamot overnight.
Wow.
Or at least a lot of it. And that was my first exposure to Mishnah. He used fingers to show, the co-wives and the brothers and sisters. And I must have been, I don't know, 10 years old or something. I don't know.
Wow. Nelson, did you want to comment something?
No, I was just wondering what Steve made of co-wives and the like at the age of 10.
What did he make of that?
Yeah, well, we talked about Sarot, that they're troubles. Of course. Little did I know.
That brings us to the issue that let me just cut out this audio thing. I don't. Okay. To the issue of Tarot, I'm bringing us back to the origin of the laws dealing with yibum. It, let's see, where is that verse? Wait a minute. In the Gemara, I just copied it just before the class. In the Gemara, on page 3b in the Babylonian Talmud, it deals with this issue of rival wives. And it quotes the Torah, which in the Talmud is often titled Rahmana. Rahmana, of course, means Harachaman, referring to God, that the Torah says, Lo tikach. And the Gemara says, Ein li elahi, tzarata minayin. How do we learn about the rival wife? Talmud Lomar, the text continues, Lo tikach litzror. And then it adds, Ve'ein li ela tzarata. How do we learn tzarat tzarata? How do we learn that it's not only the one rival wife, but the rival wife of the rival wife? And the answer to that is, it says litzror with two ratios. It could say latzur or latzor with one resh. The extra resh is there to teach us also the rival wife of the rival wife. So I look now at the English. The Torah says you shall not take with her, teaches that even in a case where is an obligation, yes. This is Leviticus 18. The verse states to be a rival to her, litzror, which indicates not only is she prohibited, but so too is her rival wife. And I have derived only her rival wife. From where is it derived that the rival wife of her rival wife is also exempt? And as we learn in the Mishnah, it keeps going. All you need is one to be exempt because of a forbidden relationship with the brother-in-law. This frees all of them. And it's because it says litzror, and it uses two ratios, not latzor, not with one resh, but with two ratios. And that is to teach that there are several rival wives, one after another. So it's in the Vayikra text where we learn this thing about litzror, ervat, here it is, verse 18. Do not take as a wife a woman who is a rival to her sister, litzror, and uncover her nakedness in the other's lifetime. So This is the rival wife. This is the reference to the rival wife, and because of two rashis, the Gemara learns that it goes beyond just one wife, but even more than one. Is that good? Okay, now let's go on to the next Mishnah if we can. The next Mishnah explains how do these women exempt their rival wives. How does this happen? And now it gives an example. For example, his daughter, that is the brother-in-law's daughter, or any one of those women with whom relations are forbidden, was married to the brother who's now the surviving brother, and this brother also had another wife. The one who died and the brother died, then just as the brother's daughter is exempt, that is, he can't marry her because she is his daughter, so too any rival wives are also exempt. Then it goes even further. If his daughter's rival wife subsequently went and married another brother to whom she's permitted, and he, the other brother, had another wife, and he too dies without children, which means his wife comes before the first brother-in-law, the daughter's father, for whom levirate marriage is forbidden, then just as his daughter's rival wife is exempt, so too the rival wife of her rival wife is exempt. In other words, if you have it gets complicated, and they purposely complicated, I think. So if one is exempt, then as it develops and you go into a more complicated thing, then all the others are exempt also. The Mishnah adds, even if they are 100 brothers, the same logic applies. If a woman is exempt from levirate marriage because she is the rival wife of a forbidden relative, or the rival wife of a rival wife of this kind, and she herself has an additional rival wife, this rival wife is also exempt, and in turn exempts her own rival wives from levirate marriage. So then they go on and they say, Ketzad. Notice this Mishnah begins with the question word Ketzad. Ketzad. How? And now another example. If any of these forbidden relatives was a minor, that is, the marriage was decided by the parents of the girl when she was still less than 12 years old, When she turns 12, she can refuse the marriage. This is called me'un. Lema'ain, to refuse. When she becomes 12 years old, she can say, I don't want to be married to this guy. If in such a case, she could have refused. Even if she didn't refuse, it's not really a full marriage. The rival wife performs chalitza and does not enter into levirate marriage. Our translation continues explaining, the rival wife may not enter into levirate marriage as she is the rival wife of a forbidden relative. However, she's not entirely exempt from levirate marriage and must be released by chalitza because the marriage of the forbidden relative was not fully valid. The marriage was contracted when the girl was still a minor. Even though she stayed married, it was not a fully valid marriage, and by Torah law, the other woman then is not considered a rival wife of a forbidden relative. She kol hayechola lema'en velo me'ana, and any woman who could, when she becomes old enough, could reject her husband, and she didn't, her rival wife is not exempt completely, but she has to do chalitza. She cannot marry, but it's kind of the issue of marriage of a minor girl is problematic. It's not a fully considered by the Torah, a fully considered marriage. Just 1 minute. I will show you. I have a visitor. You see my visitor? Yes?
Is that Jean?
No? Yes. Say hello. Yes, they see you.
Hello, everybody.
Jean is in a class here at In Motion. Yes, I have a couple of questions to answer, but if you are that, yes. Where are you going to? The other class across the way, I think. You have a class at 11:15. Okay, you have 6 minutes. Go out, you'll see. Okay, Karen, you have a question.
Yeah, so is the minor at that point a patula or a divorced woman or a widow?
No, she is a widow.
Okay.
She's a widow. Her husband, whom she could have but did not reject, died. And the rival wife of that woman is not, she's the daughter of the brother. In other words, this woman married his niece. Okay?
Yeah.
So the brother-in-law, who is the lever, he is the brother-in-law who's required to marry his brother's widow. He can't.
Right.
The rival wife of this woman, who could have refused because the marriage was when she was still a minor, the rival wife isn't a fully rival wife. And therefore, she isn't completely free. But she has to do chalitza. He can't marry her because she's kind of a rival wife. But she's not completely free, so there has to be chalitza. No. Yes, Elliot.
Yeah, Rabbi, at this point in time, if there were conflicts among individuals, who would resolve them? Was there a Beis Din or was a Sanhedrin operating at that time? How would the disputes be carried further and resolved?
Well, they'd be resolved by a rabbi,
Just one rabbi, not a group?
No, such a case wouldn't need a Beit Din, but it would be resolved by a rabbi. Nelson, you had a question.
Well, it occurred to me that this is such a complicated matter. One way
it only gets worse. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
One way of drawing a fence around it is simply to ban multiple marriages.
Well, of course, Ashkenazim since the 10th century have not had this problem. And
is this a part of the reasoning, or part of the reason that the ruling was widely accepted?
No, I think the culture, the Christian culture in which plural marriage was not permitted, was frowned upon. Don't forget what happened to the Mormons, who did practice plural marriage, and some of them are apparently still practicing it. Christians did not practice this, and in fact were very strongly opposed to it. On the other hand, Muslims continue to practice it. So Jews living under Muslim rule had no reason to reject it, and every reason to practice it. We are deeply influenced by our environment. And even though some would argue that halakha, we don't want to pay any attention to our environment when it comes to Jewish law, we're just following what God told us. Truth of the matter is, it doesn't happen that way. We are human beings. Even rabbis are human beings. As my wife likes to put it, they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else. So the environment has a tremendous influence on the development of Jewish law. And anyone
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
How much of the rules are based upon a desire for inheritance, and how much might be based on a desire to procreate among these rival wives?
Well, the need to procreate obviously was a major concern. You know, obviously, that many babies and mothers died in childbirth. Babies' infant mortality was very, very high, and so the need to procreate was a major concern. But there was a general kind of a sense that men who had enough resources could have more than one wife. You could, as we know from too many cases in our culture here, older men who take young women as wives. They divorce the wife who is more or less their age, and then go for somebody who's the age of their granddaughter. It makes them feel young. This is I guess, a human male failing, in my view, a failing, but it's pretty universal, I think. Or I won't say universal, but it's not uncommon. Put it like that. So we'll go back, if that's okay. We can go back to the next Mishnah. Yes, let me just see. Oh, we need to go here. Everybody, okay? So the next Mishnah reads as follows. There are 6 women with whom relations are forbidden, who are not enumerated in the first Mishnah, but they are forbidden, and not only forbidden, they are more severe. Oops, I'm sorry. They are more severe than those listed in the first Mishnah, because they may be married only to others and may never be married to any of the brothers due to the closeness of their relationship. However, this stringency entails a corresponding leniency. Since the halacha of levirate marriage is entirely inapplicable in these cases, their rival wives are permitted to marry the brother-in-law. In contrast to the list above. So what is this all about? The rival wife of a forbidden relative is forbidden herself only if the mitzvah of levirate marriage is applicable, but where it is not in effect, she is permitted. What are we talking about here? We're talking about the following: his mother, his father's wife, his father's sister, his paternal half-sister, and the wife of his paternal half-brother. Each of these women with whom relations are forbidden is forbidden equally to all of the brothers. And therefore, the mitzvah of levirate marriage does not apply at all. And therefore, her rival wife is permitted. In other words, what this Mishnah is saying is that if the original marriage was a forbidden marriage, you're not allowed to marry your mother or your father's wife, even if it's not your mother, or your sister's father, if it's a half-sister, or the wife, your father's wife, your father's sister, your paternal half-sister, the wife of his father's brother, the wife of his paternal half-brother. All of these are forbidden marriages. So if the marriage itself is forbidden, then the rival wives are permitted, because the marriage itself was not a legitimate marriage, and so the law contained in the first Mishnah does not apply, and therefore the rival wives are permitted to the brother-in-law. Questions? Any questions? Okay, we can go back. So obviously this is a bit strange. How would you allow such a marriage? It is forbidden in the Torah. The punishment for such a marriage is karet, which means God will shorten such a man's life. He's not going to live a full life. His life will be cut short. The word for this in Hebrew is karet. Karet. Lichrot is the word used to cut down a tree. It's also, of course, used to make a covenant. Because, as you know from Genesis, a covenant is made where you kind of split the two parties to the covenant. So karet is to cut off the life. That marriage was not permitted. Now we go on to the next Mishnah, and strange enough, we find out that everything we've been talking about is according to Beit Hillel, and Beit Shammai doesn't agree with any of this. Up to this point, says our translation, the discussions were based on the assumption that not only may a forbidden relative not enter into a levirate marriage, but such a relative frees any rival wife from such a requirement of levirate marriage or chalitza. However, we learn here that this is not everybody's opinion. Beit Shammai permits the rival wives, as they did not, that is, Beit Shammai did not accept Beit Hillel's position, which is based on how Beit Hillel interprets the biblical verses. But Beit Hillel, as we learned in the first Mishnah, forbids them both from levirate marriage and chalitza. So we learn that the previous Mishnayot are in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel, and Beit Shammai does not agree. We go on to say that if any of the rival wives of the brother performed chalitza, Beit Shammai disqualifies her from marrying into the priesthood. You know, I'm sure, that Kohanim are not permitted to marry divorcees or converts. And now we learn that according to Beit Shammai, the rival wife of a woman who performed chalitza is not fit for marriage to a Kohen, to a priest. Which means that the chalitza was fully valid. Consequently, they are disqualified from marrying a priest, like all other women who perform chalitza. We didn't know that. Any woman who performs chalitza also is not permitted to a Kohen. But Beit Hillel says, oh no, they can marry a Kohen. For Beit Hillel maintains that no legal act of chalitza was performed here at all. If they entered into a levirate marriage, oh, this is the next one. Beit Hillel okay, Chaltzu, Beit Shammai Poslim, Beit Hillel Machshirim. Now we go on to another case. If they married into a levirate marriage, Beit Shammai deemed them fit for the priesthood, as in their opinion, this is a fully legal levirate marriage. But Beit Hillel disqualifies these rival wives because they engaged in licentious sexual relations as the rival wives of a forbidden relative. Now, the most important thing in this Mishnah, from my perspective, is now coming. The Mishnah comments, although Beit Hillel prohibits rival wives to the brothers, and Beit Shammai permits them, and although these disqualify and those deem them fit, Beit Shammai did not refrain from marrying women from Beit Hillel, nor did Beit Hillel refrain from marrying women from Beit Shammai. Furthermore, with regard to all of the disputes concerning the laws of ritual purity and impurity, where these rule, that is, one school rules an article is ritually pure, and the other school rules it's ritually impure, they did not refrain from handling ritually pure objects, each with the other. That is, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel frequently used each other's vessels. As far as I'm concerned, this is the most important thing we've learned to this point. And that is, though they disagree, when it came to action, they put those disagreements aside and looked upon one another as Jews, and did not use that to further divide as we see too much of today. Stephen, welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi. My question, going back 10 minutes, was it biblical or rabbinic that if you didn't follow these edicts, what was prescribed, your life would be cut short? Is that rabbinic or biblical?
The punishment is rabbinic.
Rabbinic.
The punishment is rabbinic, but the law is biblical.
Okay, so if the law is biblical, it's coming from Hashem, and if that's the case, then that indicates to me, between the lines, that the length of your days is prescribed. It is already written somewhere in the Shamayim that your life has a finite time, and that time will be short. You can't shorten something that is infinite and that isn't known. right?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the concept. That if you break one of these laws for which the punishment is karet, you are not punished by a human court, but God will punish you, then the assumption that is that you will die sooner than you would have had you not committed that sin.
Rabbi,
Elliot?
is this correct whipping or ostracism or both?
Neither one. God will take care of it. Certain things have to be dealt with in a human court. Others are dealt with by God.
When did this concept of malchus come about?
No, that's
Whipping. Was that later
no,
on?
no, that is the human court. Those, of course, are punishment issued by a human court. Okay, so those malchot, and there's times, of course, of skila, of killing someone. If you break the Sabbath, the punishment is skila. That's a human punishment. But
what about cherem? What about cherem?
Cherem, of course, is also human. The community can excommunicate someone, but those are human. God's when it's not up to humans, then there are things. In fact, I was just studying some of this with my my chavruta in Baba Kama. We're studying Baba Kama, and there are certain sins, certain things that you do and that are wrong, but the human court does not punish you, though you are punished by God. Okay, so I wish Karen a safe trip and look forward to hearing about your studies at Pardes, and to all of you a good a good week, and stay well, and see you next week in Yirtzeh Hashem.
Happy Canada Day. July the
Oy,
1st.
oy, oy. Okay, and for those Americans, an early happy Independence Day.
Yasher Koach. Thank you, Rabbi.
Yep.
Take care.
Bye.
Take care.